Hi there, it's Ken with Roguedeckbuilder.com, here with my tournament report, here my deck list for the PTQ Salt Lake that I did end up winning with Soul Sisters. The format was modern, and here it is. Here's the deck list that I took it down with. I'll just go over the cards one by one here and explain their purpose and how well they performed and what changes I would make. Even though I did win this, there definitely is some changes that I would make to this deck. So the only removal that this deck runs is Path to Exile. Very versatile removal. Can remove basically any creature in the game. Very good against Wormcoil Engines. And the one casting cost is just is the premier removal in Modern. The best by far, and White has it, which is awesome because it fits perfectly in this deck. Now, it's called Soul Sisters because of these cards here, the Soul Warden and the Soul's Attendant. And basically what these two cards do is whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you may gain 1 life. And I'm using 6 of these total, 3 of each, as well as 4 Ariak Champion. The reason why I included Ariak Champions in this deck was because Ariak Champion is very good against Red Deck Wins, Jund, and UWR Flash, which are very popular decks in this format. They can't get rid of it. In any one of those decks, they have no way to get rid of Ariak Champion. UWR Flash uses Lightning Helixes and Lightning Bolts and Electrolyzes. Jund uses Abrupt Decays and Lightning Bolts, which protection of black and red dodges. And Burn, of course, uses a billion different burn spells that cannot target the Ariak Champion. And it blocks Goblin Guides all day long, blocks Vexing Devils all day long. Very, very good card. If you get this out versus Red Deck Wins, you are most likely going to win, as they do have ways to deal with these guys. Now, the traditional Soul Sisters just uses a total of 8, but I'm using a total of 10, and Ariak Champions kind of doubles up as another Soul Sister or just a beater that eventually can win the game against those decks that I just mentioned. Now, the reason why they use Soul's Attendants and Soul Wardens, especially in this deck, is for a Johnny's Pride Mate. You can go a first turn Soul Warden into a second turn of Johnny's Pride Mate, and when a Johnny's Pride Mate comes out, it automatically becomes a 3/3 because you gain life, that trigger goes on the stack, and then you get a +1/+1 counter. And then if your opponent casts any creatures after that, your Johnny's Pride Mate becomes very big very quickly. It outraces Tarmogoyf all of the time. Tarmogoyf a lot of times they'll pop it down for like a 4/5, and this guy will already be a 5/5. So very good card. The other combination, the other second turn combination in this deck is Martyr of the Sands and Serra's Ascendant. So you can play a Serra's Ascendant first turn followed by a second turn Martyr of the Sands, sack it, reveal 5 white cards or four white cards in your hand to gain 12 life, and you'll be at 32 life, and this dude becomes a 6/6 flying lifelinker, which is amazing. If they don't have removal right in their hand, it's pretty much good game. You're especially against damage-based decks, you're going to become out of control very quickly with Serra's Ascendant being a 6/6 flyer. What makes this deck very, very good is how resilient it is, and the reason why it is so resilient is you have cards like Squadron Hawks. Squadron Hawks is basically a 4/1. You cast it once, and you get to go grab 3 other cards to replace it. The 1/1 flying is awesome because it gets pumped up from Honor the Pures, so the evasion eventually will get you there. Even if it takes 10 turns, you'll get there at the Squadron Hawks, as well as Spectral Processions. I only ran 3 of in this version. I had to make 1 cut, and it was a Spectral Procession, but I don't think in the future, I think I'll run the 4 of package because Spectral Procession is so good with Windbrace Heights, this card right here. Now, why it's so good is you get to put 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens on the battlefield, and that's exactly what Windbrace Heights uses, is 3 attackers to activate its Hideaway. Basically, Windbrace Heights, when it comes into play, you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library and put 1 face down underneath Windbrace Heights, and then if you attack with 3 or more creatures, you can activate it for 1 white and tapping it, and you get to put that card into play. You get to cast it. So you can put an Honor Appear underneath it, a Path to Exile underneath it, anything you draw. And what I love to see was a Ranger. You know, throw a Ranger under Windbrace Heights, and you're back in the game even if you've been board wiped, and you get 3 cards for basically free. Just the cost of having this come into play tapped, which isn't the biggest deal ever. It doesn't mention on here, but Windbrace Heights does come into play tapped. So anyway, and then you have Rangers of Eos. Ranger of Eos, when it comes into play, you get 2 more converted mana cost 1 or less creatures, which in this deck is either Serra Attendant, Martyr of the Sands, Soul's Attendant, or Soul Warden. And again, this is another 3-for-1 card. they can get you back in the game and make it miserable for spot removal base decks to try to beat this deck. Anyway, yeah, very good deck overall. I like playing it. I think it's got some very good matchups like Splinter Twin. Splinter Twin, they have to be able to remove. Another reason why Arc Champion is so good is because Splinter Twin has no real way except for Echoing Truth to get rid of Arc Champion. So they can't Pyroclasm it, and that means that if you have 2 Arc Champions out, they can't Pestermite, and if you only have 1 Arc Champion out, they can't Deceiver Exarch for the win. And so very good matchup. I didn't end up going against Splinter Twin. I built this deck specifically for Splinter Twin because I thought a million people were going to run it, and I think a lot of people did end up running it. I just never saw Splinter Twin. I saw a lot of people to the sides of me playing it, but never did get matched up against Splinter Twin. There was one, however, in the top 8, which did get beat by the other Soul Sisters that made the top 8. There was one other guy that made top 8 with Soul Sisters, and man, that was a horrible mirror matchup. Game 1, he ended up conceding because we did a deck count, and he had 20 cards left, and I had 21 cards. And we figured that he was going to deck himself before either one of us killed each other because I was at 185 life, and he was at something like 211 life. It was crazy. Anyway, I think that goes over the main deck here, and I'll go to the sideboard and why I included this. Rest in Peace was very good against Storm, and very good against a lot of the tier 2 and tier 3 decks that have any sort of graveyard recursion. There's like the Vengevine decks and a few other decks like Living End that do use the graveyard, and I wanted to have at least one out against those decks. Even though without Rest in Peace, this deck is actually very good against the Dredgevine deck, and it's decent against Living End because sometimes Living End can't combo off and kill you in one turn, as sometimes you'll have stuff in the graveyard and it brings back all that stuff, and you gain a gazillion life off a million creatures coming into play. And yeah, that's that. And you can put them on this deck, even though it isn't considered like aggro, it can be very aggro with, like I said, with the second turn Sarah's Ascendant swinging for 6, or the second turn 5/5 Ajani Pridemate. You know, both of those are great great aggressive draws that happen all the time because you just need 2 pieces for this to work. Anyway, so we'll talk about Immortal Servitude last here. I'm going to go on to Suppression Field. Suppression Field is very good against a ton of different decks. It's very good against Pod, very good against RG Tron, and even Blue Tron. Not as good against Blue Tron, but it's still decent. It's very good against Splinter Twin, and very good against Affinity, even, for they can't activate their Springleaf Drum or their Cranial Plating without costing another 2. So Suppression Field is a very, very good card against a number of those decks, anything that has a lot of activated abilities. Stony Silence is another great card against Tron and Affinity, so I included 2 of those. Tron is kind of a problematic matchup. A lot of times you can outrace them, and Wormcoil, you have an answer to the Wormcoil with Path to Exile, but good old Karn can be miserable for this deck to try to beat. Leonin Arbiter I put in for Pod and Scapeshift, but hindsight, I think Aven Mind Center is better than Leonin Arbiter because this dude dies to Pyroclasms, which Scapeshift uses, and so a lot of times Scapeshift just ignores it before they start searching. They just Pyroclasm, and then they start searching for stuff. And this dude actually does end up messing up your Rangers sometimes, but not a big deal against your own deck here. But good with Path to Exile. If you have a Leonin Arbiter out, they can't get a land with Path to Exile, or they have to pay 2 anyway. Kataki is something I put in because I thought Affinity might be a real thing, or Eggs might be a real thing, but I didn't see either one of those. And this is probably a card that I would end up cutting because Kataki's not... I mean, you already have a very good matchup versus Affinity, and this is just, making you win more, especially with a lot of these anti-sideboards against Affinity to begin with. 2 Disenchants, very versatile card, good against like Pod, very good against Splinter Twin, good against a few other decks. One of the Jun decks that I ran against was using Sword of Light and Shadow, and two of the UWR Flash decks were using Sword of War and Peace, and this gives you an answer to those, as both of those swords gives you protection from wipe, which can be a pain in the butt to try to get around. So a very versatile card, can kill a lot of things in the format. Very good against Affinity, of course, because it destroys artifacts. Then I included Blind Obedience as another Splinter Twin card, but it's not that great even against Splinter Twin, because they can just activate their combo at the end of turn, at the end of their end step, and that means end of your end step, and that means they can untap with all of their tokens and swing for the win the next turn. So like I said, this deck already is very good against Splinter Twin, especially with Suppression Field, and I don't really see another matchup that Blind Obedience would really come into really be a threat. So this is definitely a card I would cut for maybe another Rest in Peace, or maybe like a Proclamation of Rebirth to add the count to like more of this Immortal Servitude type cards, or even maybe another Leyline of Sanctity. A couple other cards that I am thinking about including in the sideboard is a Hero of Bladehold, just a one of, because it's another way to get back into the game after they've board wiped, and that card is miserable for control. It dodges a Lightning Bolt, it dodges Abrupt Decay, dodges Electrolyzes, and then if you swing just once, you're attacking for quite a bit. You're attacking for 7 damage, and then you've got the tokens on board, and next turn, again, you're going to be swinging for even more unless they deal with it. So I really like Hero Bladehold. I think it's very well positioned in this meta for being played, at least in the sideboard option. Another card is Sword of Light and Shadow. I think works very well in this deck because you have enough targets you can bring back with Sword of Light and Shadow. And it works very well. There's a lot of, like, Lingering Souls can sometimes chump block a lot, and there is some, like, even Deathrite Shamans and Bobs that you get protection from black, and it's not that big of a deal, but the protection of black does come handy every once in a while. Leyline of Sanctity was put in here for basically Scape Shift and Burn. It's okay against a few other matchups, but those are the main two. Scape Shift is a little bit problematic for this deck to handle. If it's just the 6 mountain version, a lot of times you can Martyr of the Sands and get yourself out of range for their Scape Shift. A lot of times they like to Scape Shift for 18 or 21 or even 24 damage. And if you Martyr the Sands and you're above 24 life, they cannot kill you after that. But if it's like the traditional, there's a lot of Scape Shift decks that have moved over to like 9, 10, 11 mountains instead, and they can do enough damage to you. They can actually Scape Shift for like 50 plus damage a lot of times. Anyway, so now let's talk about Immortal Servitude. Immortal Servitude was my MVP sideboard card by far because this dude won me a game. We were in game 3 in my last matchup. I had to win to get into the top 8, and he had a Restoration Angel equipped to a Sword of War and Peace, and I was at something like 8 life, or I think it was at like 5 life, and he was going to deal me lethal next turn, and there was one card in my deck that could save me, which was Immortal Servitude, because I had 4 of these dudes in the graveyard, and one more Sarah's Ascendant, and if I Immortal Servitude for 1, it brought them all back, and I was able to gain 16 life off of that. So maybe let's see. So they see 3, 3, 3. I was able to gain 12 life. That's what it was, and it put me up to 16 out of range for his Restoration Angel, equipped with the Sword of War and Peace. And also, I had 2 Honor the Pures out, so it had basically 3 3/3s in play, or 5 3/3s in play. And he was down low. He was down to like 8 life, and so there's no way he could block them all and survive. So yeah, it was the Immortal Servitude ripping off the top that won me the game. Immortal Servitude also won me a game against UW Control. It brought me back into the game after he wiped my board a gazillion times with Day of Judgments. Or actually Supreme Verdicts is what he was using in that. And also against Rug. Against a Rug deck, he electrolyzed a gazillion times, wiping my board. And I was able to Immortal Servitude and get everything back. And the reason why I like Immortal Servitude over Proclamation of Rebirth is it oftentimes hits more than just 3 targets. Like I said, it hit 5 in that particular game that it did win, whereas Proclamation of Rebirth wouldn't have won me the game. It wouldn't have brought me up to a life total that would have been enough to survive the next hit with Restoration Angel. And also, the good thing about this deck is, as you can see, I've kind of built it for 2 mana casting cost creatures as well. You got the Arc Champions, you got the Squadron Hawks, you got the Johnny's Pride Mates. And especially Squadron Hawk, a lot of times if you have 1 in the graveyard, you have all 4 of them in the graveyard. So Immortal Servitude for 2 a lot of times can bring back like 4 Squadron Hawks and an Arc Champion, which is awesome. Puts you right back into the game. So loving this card a lot. I'm going to frame it because it did win me the PTQ, because I was dead on board and I had to rip that Immortal Servitude off the top, which was awesome. And yeah, I went on to win, which was great. So let's just talk about the matchups real quick. And this is what made my run so amazing, is game number 1, I get matched up against Infect, which is a very, very hard matchup. Infect doesn't care about your life total, and it's incredibly quick, and you basically have to have a Path to Exile or you're dead. And first game, I kept a hand where I thought I could maybe race him. It was the good old Soul Warden into a Johnny's Pridemate, and a Johnny's Pridemate was huge, but he was able to chump block it with a Glistener Elf, and then I believe on 4th turn he was able to kill me with a Blighted Agent, and I can't chump block. It's basically Blighted Agent's the only thing I need to really worry about in the deck, because everything else I can chump block forever with like Spectral Processions or Squadron Hawks or whatnot, and then eventually swing back for other creatures hitting him, and then wheedle his life total down to where, you know, I can outrace his Infect. But so the only real 2 cards you have to worry about are Inkmoth Nexus and Blighted Agent. He's able to get the Blighted Agent out first game. And second game, I kept a very risky hand with a Disenchant, 1 land, and it was like a bunch of Soul Wardens and Soul's Attendants. And I had that Disenchant, and I'm like, okay, I can deal with the Inkmoth Nexus, great card. And he did. He led off with the Inkmoth Nexus, and I didn't see that second land. And he killed me on like turn 4, because I very risky hand. I probably shouldn't have kept it, but just needed the other mana for that second Disenchant, and then I would have been golden. But it is what it is. It was a tough loss, game number 1 against Infect, something that this deck isn't very good against to begin with. And I was pretty bummed out. You know, a lot of times you lose your first match, you get pared down the entire rest of the tournament, and your tiebreakers are horrible, and it's just puts you on a lot of pressure because you can't lose another game. And yeah, so second round I go against a UWR Flash, and we end up drawing. It goes to one of those where I think he was actually running Supreme Verdicts and Electrolyzes in that deck, and he was just able to keep wiping my board, but he didn't have really any way to kill me. And actually, it was kind of a player's mistake on the second game where I tapped out when I had a Path to Exile in my hand. I was at 25 life, and he was able to activate, like, this is how late the game went. He was able to activate 2 Celestial Colonnades, he attacked with his Geist of St. Traft, and at the end of my turn, he like double Snapcaster electrolyzed me, and it was like perfect 25 damage he swung in for, because he's able to Cryptic Command and activate 2 Celestial Colonnades to tap down all my creatures and attack for exactly 25 damage. And if I wouldn't have been stupid and tapped out, I could have kept a Path to Exile up, Path one of his Celestial Colonnades, and then swung for the win the next game. But we didn't have enough time to go to game 3, and we ended up drawing. So I started out the tournament with a loss and a draw, and a lot of people at that time would just drop. And even though I could still get in, statistically I could still get in if I win them all out, if I win every one of my matches from there on out. But I decided to stay in it, and then went up against Rug the next game, which is a very favorable matchup for me. This was the Rug with Aether Vial, Tarmogoyf, and good old Snapcaster Mages, Eternal Witnesses, where they try to get just crazy card advantage with like Electrolyzes, Cryptic Commands, Eternal Witnesses, Snapcaster Mages. And yeah, it's a very annoying deck because he had to continually waste removal. I think one of the games I went through 7 Cryptic Commands. He ended up casting 4 Cryptic Commands and flashing them back 3 times, and he almost was able to flash back the 4th one. And it was just crazy how many Cryptic Commands I had to go through. And then on game number 2, though, I had the nut draw with Martyr of the Sands with Sarah's Ascendant, and that deck doesn't use any sort of removal except for Electrolyzes and Lightning Bolts. And he had to keep wasting his Cryptic Commands very early in that game to tap down just my Sarah Ascendant. So I was able to win 2-0 against Rug. And then the next matchup I went against Lingering Jund, which one of the matchups was quite scary because he did equip a Tarmogoyf to two sort of Light and Shadows, but even that life gain wasn't enough to stop my Swarm, and he was bringing back Deathrite Shamans every turn, but I just got one of those draws with like double Spectral Processions and double Windbrace Heights, and was just able to get so much crazy card advantage. And again, the second match was I think I got 2 Arc Champions out, and he had a handful of like Lingering Souls, and so every time he played a Lingering Souls, I'm gaining a crap ton of life with Arc Champions, and he had no way to remove the Arc Champions. So this dude right here is such a boss against Jund. Can't Abrupt Decay him, can't Lightning Bolt him, can't Maelstrom Pulse him. And yeah, one of the games I ended up losing 3 Honor of Pures to 1 Maelstrom Pulse, which was annoying, but and ended up just eventually between the Squadron Hawks and Spectral Processions to beat him down. The Tarmogoyfs become pretty obsolete against the Johnny's Pride mates late game when these guys get huge, and their Goyfs are still just sitting at 4/5s or 5/6s. And then my next matchup was against UW Control. This was the good old Sun Titan with Phantasmal Image, with Snapcaster Mages, Supreme Verdict, Cryptic Commands. And this one actually, he even ran a Gideon. I haven't seen Gideon forever. The old school Gideon that makes you attack him. And that ended up winning game 2 when he was able to get out a quick Gideon. And game 1 I was able to take, I got another one of those Ranger VO Spectral Processions, filling up my hand and swinging in, eventually got him for enough damage. And then game 3, again, I had the nut draw with Soul's Attendant, followed by a Johnny's Pride mate, followed by another Johnny's Pride mate, and it was just too much damage too quickly for him to really come back. He was able to Supreme Verdict once, but then a Spectral Procession and Auto Pure finished him off shortly after that. So then I had to go against UWR Flash again for the next matchup, which I had to win. And that matchup was very scary because I had to fight through so many electrolyzes. Game 1 I was able to take quite easily with the Spectral Processions and Squadron Hawks just out-tempoing him. And then game number 2, he was able to just get insane card advantage out of electrolyzes and Lightning Helix to keep him in the game, and eventually a Geist of St. Traft. I think it was a Geist of St. Traft equipped to a Batter Skull that got me, and it was just impossible to deal with. So yeah, I couldn't path the Geist. I ended up wasting pass on like Snapcaster Mages and stuff just to try to swing in for the win. But between the life gain from Batter Skull and the damage from Geist of St. Traft, he eventually got me. So that went on to game number 3, and that was the game where I top decked Immortal Servitude for the win, which was very exciting, which got me to top 8. And top 8, I was actually 8th out of the 8. And so I had to play up the entire time. And I was going against the number 1 ranked player. He was playing like a junk smallpox deck. So a white, black, green smallpox deck where it just, between Thoughtseizes, Inquisition, Thoughtcasts, and Liliana's, it just tries to remove your hand, and then they beat you down with Tarmogoyfs or Lingering Soul tokens or just Deathrite Shaman. But this deck is a nightmare for that deck because, again, the Arc Champion got it out first game. He didn't have an answer for it. Second game, I do believe I got a Rest in Peace out, so his Deathrite Shamans and his Goyfs were completely useless. So he had a bunch of 0/1 Tarmogoyfs, and yeah. Basically, yeah, and a bunch of dead Deathrite Shamans that couldn't do anything, and then I eventually just got him with all the, Spectral Processions on the Pure. A very easy matchup. Won that matchup 2-0. And then on to the semifinals, it was a Soul Sister Mirror, which was the longest, grindiest matchup ever. Like I said earlier, the first matchup, we ended up doing a deck count. He had 20 cards left. I had 21 cards left. We were both well above 175 life, and he just figured he was going to deck himself before I did. And we went on game number 2, and he got the crazy Martyr of the Sand and Asera's Ascendant and was able to win that game. And then the final match, game 3, he mulled to 5, and I kept the Soul's Attendant, Johnny's Pride Mate hand, and was able just to beat him down with the Johnny's Pride Mate. And it was actually Disenchant that really won me the game, because I think I had like a Spectral Procession out, and he had one as well, and I was able to swing in with everything. And so he blocked to try to remove my Spectral Processions, and I disenchanted his Honor the Pure, and I had Honor the Pure out as well. So they were both 2/2 tokens, but mine making his 1/1 tokens, I wiped his board and still got in there with like quite a bit of a Johnny Pridemate damage, and it just too much for him to come back from. Anyway, horrible mirror match. You never want to go Soul Sisters versus Soul Sisters. It's awful, especially with the Disenchant definitely was the MVP in the sideboard, but all these dead cards that are completely pointless against the Soul Sisters. Anyway, then on to UWR Flash for the finals, and it was another very easy matchup where I was able to get Arc Champions both games that he could not deal with. MVP, very good, very good card. If you're running Soul Sisters, I I definitely say run Arc Champion. Do not run the traditional Soul Sisters. Find a place for Arc Champion. It's that good. And yeah, anyway, that's my tournament report. I felt good after starting the day off at 0-1-1. I didn't think I had a chance in hell to win the tournament, but I ended up doing it. And cool thing about it is the guy that I end up beating for the finals, he ended up going to Denver the next week to play in their PTQ, and he took it. He took it with his deck that I beat. So he almost won 2 PTQs in a row if it wasn't for my Soul Sister standing in the way. So yeah, anyone that thinks this deck is a joke, this like $80 deck is a joke, needs to relook at it, because it does have some very favorable matchups against the field right now. I was just checking MTG Goldfish, and the #1 deck, at least on MTGO right now, is that UWR Flash deck, and I faced that 3 times at my local PTQ, and he actually took, the guy that I beat for the finals took that same deck to Denver and won with it. So UWR Flash and Jund are very, very popular decks, and Soul Sister's very well positioned against either one of those. So I do highly recommend playing it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this tournament report. This is Kevin from Roguedeckbuilder.com. I'm going to Pro Tour Dragon's Maze, and so I need all of your guys' help to help me build a unique deck that I know that Dragon's Maze will be legal, and a lot of new cards will probably mix up the block a bit, but I still want to try to build a core of a deck with what we have right now, since we have 2 of the sets already. And is Dragon Maze a full set? I can't remember if Dragon Maze is another huge set or if it's a smaller set, but either way, I want to at least have a feel for block and be good at that format for Pro Tour Dragon's Maze. I'll keep you informed of what I'm brewing. This is Kevin from Roguedeckbuilder.com. Thanks for watching.